Tantor Audio presents Colors of Chaos by L.E. Modesitt, Jr. Narrated by Kirby Heyborne. Colors of White. 1. Ceryl shifted his weight. He stood in the west corner of the small second-level rampart of the guardhouse before the north gates to the white city of Fairhaven. That was the only corner where the sun touched. His white leather jacket was fastened all the way up to his neck, and even with the heavy shirt and white wool tunic of a full mage underneath, he was cold. He glanced out at the white granite highway that stretched north and, just beyond where he could see, curved eastward toward Lydiar. As the day had passed, it had warmed enough that his breath no longer formed a white cloud, but the north wind still cut through his white woolen trousers. His eyes went down to the armsmen in red-trimmed white tunics, who stamped their boots and walked back and forth in front of the gates, waiting for travelers. The rumbling of another set of wheels, iron ones, on the stone alerted Ceryl, and he looked up and out along the highway to study the approaching vehicle, a high-sided wagon painted cyan and cream, escorted by a full score of lancers in cyan livery, 10 preceding and 10 following the wagon. Cyan was the color of the Duke of Lydiar. Ceryl couldn't help but wonder what was being conveyed to Fairhaven with so many lancers. Chests of golds owed for road taxes? Trade goods from the port at Lydiar as some sort of repayment? The ponderous approach of the wagon and the 4 horses indicated the load was heavy. Slowly, the teamster in cyan eased the wagon up to the gates and the white armsmen. The Lydian lancers reined up on each side of the wagon and behind. "Tariffs and goods for Fairhaven, bound for the Wizard Square," announced the captain of the Lydians, a squarish, black-haired and bearded figure. He extended a scroll to the man in charge of the inspection and guard detail. Ceryl took a deep breath and let his order chaos senses study the wagon. Metal. Coins in chests, as he had suspected, although there were but 3 chests. Under the dark gray canvas were also a dozen small barrels, more like quarter barrels. Salt, perhaps. Most salt came from Lydiar, the closest port, for all that it was 2 long days or 3 short ones. The head gate guard glanced up at Ceryl, his eyes questioning the mage. 2 of the lancers behind the Lydian officer followed his eyes. One swallowed as his eyes took in Ceryl's whites. "That's what the scroll says, sir," the detail leader called up to Ceryl. "It's as they say, de Boral," Ceryl answered. "You may pass," the head guard announced. The wagon rolled past the guardhouse, and Ceryl listened. Listening was the most interesting part of the duty, at least usually. "Always have a mage here?" "Always. Sometimes you see someone get turned to ashes." "You're jesting." "No, not something to jest at." Ceryl hadn't had to use chaos fire on any person yet in his gate guard duties, but he'd turned 2 wagons carrying contraband, one had iron blades hidden under the wagon bed, into ashes, and sent the teamster and his assistant to the road crew, where they'd spend the rest of their lives helping push the great white highway through the West Horns. The young mage shrugged. He doubted that either man had been the one who had planned the smuggling, or would have benefited much, but he'd seen Fenard and Jellicoe, and grown up in Hrisbarg in the shadow of the played-out mines. He'd been a mill boy, a scrivener's apprentice, and a student mage under the overmage Jeslek. All those experiences had made one thing clear. Strict as the rules of the guild were, harsh as the punishments could be, and sometimes as unfair as they had been, from what he'd seen, the alternatives were worse. After stamping his white boots again, Ceryl walked across the short porch, 4 steps, and turned back, hoping that keeping moving would keep him warmer. Sometimes it did. Most times it didn't. He wanted to yawn. He'd thought sewer duty had been tiring, but it hadn't been half so tiring as being a gate guard. At least in cleaning sewers, he'd been able to perfect his control of chaos fire. As a gate mage, mostly he just watched from the tiny rampart on top of the guardhouse just out from the north gate. Also, the sewers were warmer in winter and cooler in summer. The sewers did stink, he reminded himself, sometimes a great deal.
"Sir?"
Ceryl glanced down. Deborah looked up at the young mage.
"We've got 2 here need medallions, a cart and a hauler's wagon."
"I'm coming down."
Ceryl walked to the back of the porch area, where he descended the tiny and narrow circular stone staircase. He came out at the back of the guard room. From there he entered the medallion room, where a wiry farmer with thinning brown hair stood. Behind him was a hauler in faded gray trousers and shirt. The farmer had just handed his 5 coppers across the battered wooden counter to the medallion guard. Behind him, the hauler held a leather pouch, a pouch that could have held anywhere from several silvers to several golds, depending on the trade and the size of the wagon. That didn't include actual tariffs either.
"Sir,"
said the guard to the farmer.
"Vaike there."
He pointed to another guard who held a drill, a hammer, and a pouch that Ceryl knew contained soft copper rivets.
"He and the mage will attach the medallion, just so as I can get going."
"It won't take but a moment,"
Ceryl assured the man, who looked to be close to the age of Tellus, the scrivener with whom Ceryl had apprenticed before the guild had found him and made him a student mage. The cart stood at the back of the guardhouse, a brown mule between the traces. The mule looked at Ceryl, and Ceryl looked back, then at the baskets of potatoes in the rear.
"Medallion should go on the sideboard around here."
Vaike positioned the brass plate a handspan below the bottom of the driver's seat.
"That be all right?"
"Might catch on stuff in the stable. A mite bit higher'd be better."
The farmer nodded.
"New wagon. Old one not much better than a stone boat, no more."
The guard raised the medallion and glanced at Ceryl.
"That's fine."
With quick motions, the guard used a grease stick to mark the wood, then took out the hand drill and began to drill the holes for the rivets.
"Can remember when it was only 3 coppers," the farmer said to Ceryl. "Before your time, young mage." He offered a wintry smile. "Not be complaining, though. Do no good. And sides, I'd rather be using the white highways than those muddy cow paths they call roads."
Ceryl nodded, his eyes straying to the medallion Vaike had laid on the wagon seat. Simple enough, just a rectangular plate with the outline of the White Tower stamped on it, and the numeral 1 for winter and the year.
"Just about ready, sir,"
Vaike announced, straightening, placing the medallion on the sideboard, and slipping the rivets pins through the holes in the medallion and in the cart sideboard. Then came the offset clamps and 2 quick blows with the hammer. The guard glanced at Ceryl. The white mage nodded and concentrated, raising a touch of chaos and infusing the medallion and rivets. He could feel the heat in his forehead, not enough to raise a sweat, but noticeable to him.
"There," Ceryl turned to the farmer. "Your cart is allowed on all white highways for another year, sir. I must warn you that if anyone tampers with the medallion, you will need another, and they could get hurt."
"I'd be knowing that, but thank you." The farmer offered a brusque nod and took the leads to the mule, flicking them and leading the cart away, walking beside the mule rather than riding. Ceryl glanced at the second vehicle, a long and high gray wagon with bronze trim. The painted emblem on the side read, "Kyrest and Field, Grain Factors." The hauler stood by the wagon.
"If you could just replace—"
Vaike nodded and looked at Ceryl. Ceryl extended his senses and bled away the remaining chaos, although there was so little left that no one would have been hurt, even if Vaike had removed the old medallion. Vaike produced a chisel and, with 2 quick snaps, removed the old medallion and then replaced it with the new. Ceryl added the chaos lock, then looked at the guard.
"Is that all for now?"
"Yes, sir." With a smile, Ceryl slipped away and back up to his perch on the 2nd level of the guardhouse. He glanced back northward over the highway, momentarily empty near the gates, though he thought he saw another wagon in the distance making its way through the gray-leaved hills toward Fairhaven. Because of the alignment of the city, he found it strange that the North Gate actually controlled the travelers from Hrisbarg and Lydiar and the far east of Kandar. It was also strange, as he reflected upon it, how much straighter the great white highway was in Galos and western Syrtis than near Fairhaven itself. Yet Fairhaven was the home of the guild and the mages who had labored centuries to build the great highways of eastern Kandar. Stamping his feet again, he walked back and forth on the walkway behind the rampart several more times, but his feet remained cold, almost numb. The bell rang, its clear sound echoing on the rampart, but Ceryl had already stepped forward with the sound of wheels on stone once more. A farm wagon stood before the guards. 3 men in rough browns stood by the wagon. 3 and a driver?
"What have you in the wagon?"
"Just our packs. We're headed to Genouilles to pick up some grain for the mill in Lava." Ceryl frowned. Lava was on the north side of the Great North Bay, a long ways to go for grain. His senses went down and out to the wagon, and he nodded to himself, marshalling chaos for what would come, knowing it would happen, and wishing vainly that it would not.
"There's something in the space beneath the seat. Oils, I'd guess."
The driver grabbed an iron blade from beneath the wagon seat, and the gate guards brought up their short swords automatically, but stepped back. Ceryl focused chaos on the driver, holding back for a moment, hoping the driver would drop the blade, but the man started to swing it forward. Whoosh! The firebolt spewed over the figure so quickly he did not even scream. The blade clunked dully on the white granite paving stones beside the wagon. White ashes drifted across the charred wagon seat. The other 3 men did not move as the guards shackled them and led them into the barred holding room to wait for the patrol wagon. The patrol would hold them until they were sent out on road duty. Ceryl was glad they hadn't raised weapons. Killing the driver had been bad enough, and he wished the man had not raised the blade. But raising weapons against gate guards or mages was strictly forbidden, and rules were rules, even for mages. 2 other guards began to inspect the wagon, then pulled open a door.
"Good screeing, sir. Almost a score of scented oils. Homorian, I'd say,"
Deborah called up to the young mage. Ceryl managed a nod. His head ached, throbbed. Myril had warned him about the backlash of using chaos against cold iron, but he'd not had that much choice if he wanted to ensure none of the guards were hurt. Absently, he had to wonder about his ability to sense the oils. No smuggler expected to get caught, and the hidden wagon compartment had been prepared well in advance, perhaps even used before. Did that mean other gate guards were less able, or lazy, or looked the other way? He pursed his lips, disliking all of the possibilities, and understanding that he knew too little to determine which, if any, might be the most likely answer. Below, the guards carried the jars of oil, probably glazed with a lead pigment, into the storage room. The confiscated goods were auctioned every 8 days, with the high bidder required to pay the taxes and tariffs on top of the final bid. The golds raised went into road building and maintenance, or so Kinnuan had told Ceryl. Even if some smuggling succeeded, Ceryl still didn't understand why people tried to smuggle things past the gates, at least things made of metal. Ceryl knew his senses couldn't always distinguish spices from a wagon's wood or cloth. Leyladin, The blonde, gray-black mage, who was the hall's healer, might have been able to do that, but most white mages couldn't. But even the least talented white mage could sense metal through a cubit of solid wood. He shook his head, fearing he knew the answer. The guild kept its secrets, kept them well. Ceryl still recalled the fugitive who'd been turned to ashes by a guild mage when Ceryl had been a mill boy for Dylert, watching through a slit in a closed lumber barn door. As de Borel supervised, another guard brought out the 2 prisoners on cleanup detail to sweep away the ashes that remained of the wagon. Every morning one of the duty patrols brought out prisoners for cleanup detail, usually men who'd broken the peace somehow, but not enough to warrant road duty. Ceryl rubbed his forehead, then turned and glanced at the western horizon. The sun was well above the low hills, well above, and the gates didn't close until full dark. Luckily, it was winter, and sunset came earlier. He couldn't imagine how long the duty day must be in the summer, and he wasn't looking forward to it. The overmage Kinnuan had told him that he would do gate duty, on and off, for a season or 2 every year for the first several years he was a full mage, perhaps longer, unless the guild had another need for him. But what other need might the guild have? Or what other skills could he develop? He definitely had no skills with arms or with the depths of the earth, as did Kinnuan and Eleazar and Jeslek. And he wasn't a chaos healer like Broca. The guild didn't need mage scriveners, his only real skill. So he could look forward to 2 or 3 years of watching wagons, to see who was trying to avoid paying road duties, or trying to smuggle iron weapons or fine cloth or spices into the city. He turned and paced back across the walkway, then returned, hoping the sun would set sooner than was likely. His eyes flickered toward the empty and cold highway, a highway that would have seemed warmer, much warmer, had Leyladin been anywhere nearer. Yet even thinking of Leyladin didn't always help. She was a healer, and he was a white mage, and black and white didn't always work out. Some whites couldn't even touch blacks without physical pain for both. He'd held her hands, but that was all. Would that be all? He paced back across the porch again, almost angrily. 2. In time, as the winds shifted, and as the rains fell less upon Kandar, and as the fair grasslands of Kaifros turned into high desert, and as the stone hills came to resemble the furnaces wherein metal is forged, others in the rest of the world came also to understand the dangers posed by the Black Isle. Even the Emperor of Far Hamor dispatched his fleets unto the Gulf of Kandar, seeking the talismans of dark order borne by Kreslin the Black, so that they might be destroyed, lest the world suffer once more the same cataclysms as befell ancient Sayador. Though warned by those of the guild of the great storms raised by the evil Kreslin, the Emperor of Hamor thought that he alone would seize the talismans of order and thus raise Hamor to become first among all lands. In his greed and arrogance, the Emperor sent more than a score of vessels, all filled with armsmen and weapons of every type and size, and those ships sailed into the port known as Land's End and attacked the small keep therein, for Kreslin was seeking the high and great winds far away. Yet, even in Kreslin's absence, Majera the Black-Hearted raised mighty fires and turned many of the Emperor's ships into funeral pyres for sailors and armsmen alike. Kreslin returned, with both his killing blade and the great winds, and all but a single ship perished, and all but a score of all those thousands of men who had sought the talismans of order perished as well. The single ship that remained, Kreslin rebuilt and refitted as the beginning to the Black Fleets. Colors of White, Manual of the Guild at Fairhaven, Preface. 3. Ceryl nodded to the tower guards on duty, although he didn't know either by name, as he passed on his way to report to the overmage, Kinnuin.
"Good day, sir,"
the older guard returned. Ceryl smiled politely, glad that this day was drawing to a close, although it hadn't been that eventful, unlike the time with the oil smugglers several 8 days before. Most days were quiet and long. Kinnuin's quarters were on the lowest level of the tower, and the door was around the corner to the left from the guard station. Durka's door was the other way. Not that Ceryl had been there, but Faltar had told him. Outside of the time when Jeslek had tried to insist that Ceryl had not succeeded in accomplishing his magely task, or rather, when Jeslek had insisted that he had not set such a task, and the High Wizard Sterol had brought in Kinnuin, Myrol, and Durka to judge the situation, Ceryl had never really had much conversation or contact with the stooped, silver-haired Durka. Then, Ceryl had seen how much power the kindly voice and stooped posture concealed. Jeslek, thank the light, had been forced to admit he had set a magely task for Ceryl, whether he had so intended or not, and Sterol and the others had agreed that Ceryl was fit to be a full mage. Ceryl snorted as he thought about it. If sneaking into a strange city and killing the ruler with chaos fire and escaping unseen didn't make for a magely task, he wasn't certain what did. Then, because he was an orphan from a suspect background, he'd been held to a more difficult standard in many ways, except for one thing. Sterol had known that Ceryl had used chaos fire before the guild had found Ceryl, and the High Wizard had let that pass. Ceryl's father hadn't been so fortunate, which was why Ceryl had ended up an orphan almost right after he was born.
"Ceryl, sir,"
he announced as he rapped on the white oak door. He didn't mind reporting to Kinnuin, the other guild overmage that he knew of besides Jeslek, but that was because the big overmage had also surmounted poverty and far more disciplinary actions than Ceryl in becoming a mage.
"Come in,"
Kinnuin's voice rumbled. Ceryl eased into the room, so different from that of Myrol or Jeslek. Myrol's quarters were filled with books, and Jeslek's almost bare of all but essentials. Kinnuin's walls were filled with colored hangings of different types and styles, but all of them featuring shades of purple, accented with other colors. His books were limited to a single 4-shelf case on the wall beside the sole window. Even the table that held his screen glass was covered with a purple cloth, trimmed with green.
"I take it that nothing untoward happened today?"
Kinnuin's lips curled into a friendly but sardonic smile, lifting slightly the purple blotch on his left cheek.
"No, sir, not a thing. There weren't many wagons and only the coach from Lydia. Just 2 passengers, a grain merchant from Warak and one from Ruzor." "Wasn't there an olive merchant from Kyfros the other day?"
2 days ago, I think."
"Not much trading coming to Fairhaven at all, is there?"
Kinnuin nodded to the chair across from him.
"We need to talk."
Ceryl's stomach tightened.
"No, you haven't done anything wrong, and the great Jeslek has been quiet so far as you are concerned. He's still out in Galos, raising more mountains. To protect the Great White Highway, he says."
Ceryl wondered. Jeslek claimed that such a use of chaos was to show the force of the guild to the prefect of Galos, but Ceryl doubted such was the sole reason.
"Also," continued Kinnuin, "Jeslek's been reporting cattle theft in the northern part of Kyfros. His scrolls indicate that the locals are complaining that the thieves are being allowed to steal Analyrian cattle and take them to Fenard for slaughter. He's sent a scroll to the new prefect, your friend, Ceryl, suggesting that Galos could use more even-handed justice."
"Ceryl won't like that. Not from the little I saw."
"No, he won't. But Jeslek is convinced that Fairhaven must apply a stronger hand." Both Ceryl and I agree about the need for a greater presence.
Kinnuin offered a short laugh.
That brings up what we need to talk about. Ceryl and I were talking the other day, and we decided that some of the junior mages need to know more about what is happening, but we're telling you each individually. I'd like you to keep this to yourself. You may discuss it with me, with Myrol, with Ceryl, and with Jeslek, of course. You may also talk with the other junior mages, but only about things which have in fact already happened.
Kinnuin cocked his big head slightly to one side.
Do you understand?
Yes, sir.
Ceryl frowned.
I think so. People are talking, but it's not always right what they're saying, and you need to make sure we understand what's really happening. But you don't want it spread all over the place, and there are some people who won't be told everything because they...
Ceryl stopped as he saw the glimmer in Kinnuin's eyes.
I'm sorry, sir. Maybe I don't understand.
Kinnuin laughed and shook his head.
You understand. You even understand the intrigue. No wonder Jeslek worries about you. Just don't share something like you just said with anyone but me or Myrol.
Ceryl nodded slowly. He noted that the Overmage had not mentioned the High Wizard Ceryl or the Overmage Jeslek. Kinnuin squared himself in his chair, put both elbows on the table, and leaned forward.
You know that Sirma is now the prefect of Galos. Liam's family, they are largely wool factors and timber merchants, is not pleased with the situation. Nor are the overcaptains of the Galossian forces, especially a fellow by the name of Taynet. He's the most senior of the overcaptains. What this means for the guild is that we really can't press Sirma for payment of all the golds that Liam owed Fairhaven from when he was prefect.
Ceryl wasn't sure how the intrigue of Galos had anything at all to do with him or the guild, but Kinnuin wasn't one for idle gossip.
The traders in Galos have been bringing in goods from Recluse through Spitlar. Wool, spices, even copper. The black traders have also been bringing in Austrian cotton and linen, and it's cheaper than what comes from Heidlin. They're shipping that copper from Southport to Spidlaria cheaper than our traders can cart it across the West Horns.
Kinnuin paused, cocking his head again, as if uncertain as to what else to say.
And they're using the profit to buy our grains and tubers. They can raise grain on Recluse, but not enough.
The junior mage waited.
The Duke of Lydiar is beginning to expand the copper mines south of Hrisparg, and might be persuaded to reopen the old iron mines. He's not happy about the cheaper copper or the iron.
Kinnuin stopped.
Does this tell you anything?
It told Ceryl a great deal, and nothing at all. Traders were always unhappy when someone else could sell cheaper, unless they were the ones who had the cheaper goods. Certainly Sirma would be in a hard position in Galos. He'd become prefect because the guild had effectively announced, through Ceryl's assassination of Liam, that it was most unhappy with the Galossians' use of the White Highways without paying the tariffs. Jeslek's use of chaos to destroy one small Galossian army had also pointed out that Galos would have trouble using armsmen to defy Fairhaven. At the same time, the traders and merchants of Galos were doubtless displeased with the thought of paying tariffs, and Liam's family certainly wouldn't be in the best of humors.
The situation isn't good, and may not get better,
Ceryl finally temporized.
What about the Viscount of Syrtis?
The Viscount cares little about any mining or metals, or the wool. His concerns are oils, and right now his merchants can sell more oil than they can harvest and press. It costs the Certans about the same whether they get wool from Montgren or from Recluse, through either Tierhaven or Spidlaria.
Ceryl thought, half wondering at the idea that he, an orphan raised by a disabled miner, would be worrying about merchants and traders and rulers as a member of the White Order of Fairhaven. Finally, he glanced at Kinnuan.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?